All right, welcome. So in this video, I want to show you how I've implemented some music in my Super Marriott Brothers. As you can see, I've got a little bit of background music in there. I've also got some jumping sounds. And I've just got those set up, and as you can see, I've also set up a mute button. And this is important, this is critical if you're going to put some music or sounds into your game. Anyone who's going to play it, someone's going to want to put it on mute. You can see I've also got a little volume slider there as well. Right now I have it on real quiet, so hopefully you can hear my voice with the music playing. And then I'll show you how to set those up too, because those, as I said, are pretty important and critical. Now, the first thing I've had to do to be able to handle music as well as the graphics we've been displaying is I'm going to upgrade my AssetManager to handle the audio as well. The audio is just a different kind of asset. And then also, I've updated my AssetManager just more than just being able to download and hand me back my assets. I've actually turned it into sort of a mini jukebox for the audio, and the sense that I've just given it some helper functions here and there that we can call to say play a track or stop a track. With the images, all we really wanted to do is, hey, give me that image back so I can draw it. But with the audio, it was sort of important to set up a little bit of extra functionality. So I'll show you how I did that. The first thing though I want to focus in is just how I've changed it for downloading. I'm queuing the audio the exact same way, give it a path. The only difference here is I've now broken up what I do with that path, depending on whether it's going to be an image that I need to create or an audio that I need to create. The technique that I'm actually using here is the exact same that I was using before. The only thing I've done here is I've put a little bit of extra logic. I grabbed the last 3 characters of the path. That should be the extension, so I call this extension. And then I'm going to basically make decisions based on the extension of the object, whether that should be an image or an audio. And my Super Marriott Brothers only uses PNGs and MP3s, which are probably the best practice. If you're making a game, I recommend PNGs, MP3s, or MP4s. You can also use other kinds of images and audio on the web that a lot of them work just as well, some not as well. For instance, you could use a JPG, but JPGs don't have transparency, so that makes it hard for games. But maybe for a background image or something, you could have a JPG. And of course, I assume most of you are pretty familiar with switch statements, but if you wanted this to work with JPGs, you just have to do something like this, and now it's going to work for a JPG as well. And maybe I'll just upgrade this as well for music, MP3s. MP4s are also common, and so you might want an MP4 as well. Or a WAV file, there's other audio files as well. Now this will allow us to load images by creating an image tag. Now remember, that was an image tag in the HTML document that will allow us to grab that image and then display it in other ways. And we set up 2 listeners to check to see if it loaded the image or had an error loading the image. And we just kept track of that to make sure, we wanted to make sure all of the triggered downloads had downloaded properly. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing with the audio. Now with the audio, I'm going to set up an audio tag instead of an image tag, so slightly different. Again, you could go over to Mozilla Developer Network and go check out all the cool events and so on associated with an audio tag. I had to do that to go find this because the first step I did was I said, hey, I'm just going to cut and paste this down here, and of course it didn't work. That usually doesn't work, and that's because there was no load event, or at least the load event didn't do the same thing I wanted it to. It didn't work, so I went and checked it out, and I noticed that in the audio there was a couple different loads because one of the reasons is an audio file, like a video file as well, is often fairly big. Image files in relative size is quite small, and so usually what happens with an image file is we'll just download the whole thing. It doesn't take very long, and we'll wait until it's loaded. That will fire off that loaded event. But with an audio file or maybe a video file, that could be really large, megabytes, gigabytes, and so often we will buffer and stream those files instead of trying to download the whole thing and then try and play it. We will stream it to you, and so what this this event that I've picked out here called loaded data, that fires off once the beginning, the first frame of the video, or the first, a little bit of the music file or audio file has been loaded, and that means it's ready to be played, meaning there's enough of it buffered or loaded that if you called play on it now, it should play without any errors. At least that's my intuition with this. So I've chosen this one here as well, and I've had no problems with this. So when it fires off here, that means we've just loaded it enough that we can start using it in our game, and that's really all we want. And then the same thing, I've set up an error handler, but I've also set up another handler as well for the audio. And again, that's because I'm going to use the AssetManager, but also I want to set up the audio to run more like you would have audio in a game. So one thing that's going to happen with audio in a game, no matter what audio you're using in the game, once it's finished playing, you're probably going to want to play it again. If it's the background music and it finished, you usually want to loop that track, so just start it back up again. But also, for instance, any sound effect, the jump effect, the shooting a fireball, whatever it might be, you're going to want to have it ready to play again the next time you jump or the next time you use that same event. And so what I've set it up here is I've set up another listener for the ended event, and that means you've been playing the audio and the audio is ended. And if the ended event happens, I fire off two things here. I call pause on the audio, that just pauses it. Now, normally, if you get to the end of the audio, it normally stops playing, and that's because there's nothing else to be played. But the other thing I want to do here is I want to reset the audio's current time back to 0. That's like setting the elapsed time of our animations back to 0. This just sets it so that we're ready to run the audio again the next time. Okay, it'll start it over again. You could use this as well to start it off at different spots in the audio, and maybe I'll just foreshadow a little bit. You can also do something called audio sprite sheets. I haven't used that here, and I'm not going to use that in this video, but if you used an audio sprite sheet, which is just one long audio file that has all your sound effects in it, you would use this sort of current time to say, oh, for the jump I want to start at this time and end at this time, and so on. But for all my audio files, I just have one sound effect per file, which makes it really easy to use. You just play them and pause them. So this again is a listener for the end. At the end, it will pause it and reset it to the beginning. Pausing it because if we reset it to the beginning, it will start playing again, and we don't want that. Now, some of our files, we might want that. Like I said, our background music, we want to loop over and over. So actually what I did is what I wanted was a different listener for my ender for the background music. And I didn't, I thought to myself, should I build this right in here to detect which is music and which is audio? Now I've actually done that with their paths. You'll notice I've separated my music into one directory and my audio into another, so I could use this extra little bit to determine if it was music or audio, but I wanted my AssetManager to stay kind of agnostic to what's going on with everything else, so I could reuse it again in other games, or you could reuse it if you wanted as well. And so for that end, I didn't decide to put it in here. Instead, I built a little helper function here that I called auto repeat, which if I call this on any of my assets after they've loaded, then it will set them up to auto repeat. And what that's done is I've just set up a second listener that calls play again. Now I need to be clear what that does here is when you call add event listener on the object for a second time on the same event, so we've already added one listener for ended. What happens if we add another one? It doesn't overwrite the old one. It adds one to a list of listeners. And in fact, all the listeners get a chance to be fired off. And the important thing that I had to go and double check is what was the order that they will be fired off in. Well, most modern browsers, well, all the modern browsers that I could detect, all fire them off in the order that you add them to the object. So this one up here was added first. This would pause it and set us back to the beginning. And so I just added another one that just started us up playing again. So anything that I wanted to set to auto repeat, I will call that here. And you can see here that in my main file now, when I've been loading up my images, I've loaded in a few extra sound effect files here, and then after I've finished downloading them all, I call auto repeat on the background music because those are the ones that I want to auto repeat. All the other music, or the other 3 sound effect music I have here, are just sound effects, so I don't want them to auto repeat. I only want them to play once. They will still reset back to the beginning, but they will not automatically play themselves. themselves again. As I've mentioned, I've set up sort of a little bit of a jukebox for my asset manager now. Instead of using get asset, which I'll probably just use for my images and sprite sheets and my animation, I've set up an extra one called play asset that will play it for me. And I set this up because whenever I want to play it, I want to reset the current time to 0 and then play it. And since I want to do these two things, even though I could put this every time I wanted to call audio.play, I decided to just make this little wrapper method here that will do both of them for me, so that I don't really have to think about it when I'm out in my game. I just call my asset manager and say, hey, play this asset, and it knows to reset it to the beginning. Now, why is that important? Well, remember, say I'm jumping and then I want to jump again. I always want to reset back to the beginning. It's true that if I got to the end, I've already set up that listener, then when I get to the end, it will set me back to the beginning. Well, sometimes we interrupt a sound effect in the middle and we want to start it up again. So say you're jumping a lot rapidly in procession, and the jump sound, at least for Mario, is actually a little bit long. It has kind of this trailing sound to it that we can just interrupt and replay the jumping sound over and over again until we finish jumping, and then it will trail off with the longer play. So what this will do for me will reset me back to 0 even if I'm not at the end or if I haven't been set back to 0 yet. So it seems like this might be a redundant line, but it is important. Otherwise, some of my jumps weren't registering. What would happen is if the last jump was still playing and then I jump again, if you call play on something that's already playing, it's still playing, nothing happens, it just keeps playing, but it keeps playing from where it's at. And so this little wrapper method that I said will start it playing again from the beginning, and that's what I wanted it to do. And so this is sort of a helpful thing. It's probably helpful in your game too, so I thought I'd build it into the Asset Manager. If you want to go steal it, go right ahead. A few other things I've done. I mentioned I set up that mute button and the adjust the volume slider. Maybe let's just take a look at that, the inputs for a second there. The mute, it was just a checkbox, so that's pretty simple. But I've also set up just one of these range sliders. Volume, your volume should be between 0 and 1, so this is easy. I just set it between 0 and 1. And because I'm working with you here in this video and I don't want it to be too loud, I set my default setting to 10% volume. And in fact, if you're setting this up on your own, I might set it pretty low. It tends, in my experience at least, web audio tends to be very loud, and I usually want these low. So as long as you have the slider, your user can slide it up and down if they need, and I usually just set mine on sort of low. I made a little function in my scene manager, which is sort of the babysitter of all my game anyways, where it's going to just check the document to see if those mute button was checked or to see if the volume slider has slide. And then in my jukebox, I just set up these two functions, mute audio and adjust volume, that basically just take that mute button and or whatever value I had in there, checking the mute checkbox, and passes it in here, which just sets the muted value for all of my audio instances. Now this is important because in the web audio, there's not sort of one central mute button that you can push, and so I wanted to build that out. I want a central mute button, and so that's why, again, like I said, building a little bit of jukebox functionality into this Asset Manager, I built this mute button that will go to every single audio that I have and mute it, or if I happen to be unmuting it, go to all of them and unmute it. And that way, any of the ones that are currently playing will be muted, but that also sets it so that any that are about to be played, may be triggered as that are coming out, will also be muted. So this doesn't just mute the ones that are currently playing, it mutes everything. And then likewise unmutes it if you call it again. And the same thing here for the volume. Again, I'm just iterating through all of the elements and then adding to them their new volume setting. So all of them get their volume set to higher or lower whenever we set it. One other thing I'll maybe mention about this for loop that's interesting here, I tried to use a for each, but if you go up here and you'll notice, if you'll notice this .cache that we're using here, we're indexing into it with paths, which are strings, not integers. And that kind of confuses the for each a little bit. And so to get it to work properly, I'm using this, which is sort of like a for each. It's for var key in the cache. Now what that will do is fetch each of the keys in the cache, not the values, and then it will allow, and then what I'm doing here is I'm grabbing out the asset by using that key that it gave me to index in. So this is sort of a bizarre way to use a for loop, or at least it's an uncommon way to use a for loop, and I thought I'd point that out in case that was a little bizarre for you. This in operator, I've actually never used the in operator before, so this one there's a first time for everything. I guess there's only one other sort of jukebox method that I set up here, which is this one, pause background music. And this one serves a simple function too, which is basically when I'm moving from one level to another, basically, I want to stop the old background music before I start up the last one. Because when I first set this up, when I first was testing it, I'd go into the next level and the old music was still playing while the new one starts out. That gets a little bit confusing and it's a little bit of a cacophony. So, this will allow me, before I play background music, I always call pause background music. And then I also call pause background music in a few other places, like when I die and so on. So now, how do I get my music playing? Well, the way I do that is sort of like animations. You're going to want to trigger it whenever whatever event happens that sound is associated with. So for instance, we know that when we start jumping, that we should switch into the jumping animation for Mario. Well, that's the exact same time that we should start the jumping sound. So usually all we're going to do is go around in our code and find those little locations where those events happen. We've already usually got a little bundle of logic doing something when that happens, and we just need to add in the sound effect. So for instance here, one thing I've done here is I've got my load level method in my scene manager. That's when I'm going to want to start out the background music. And so what I've got here is I've gone and actually I've added to my levels a little music entry so that when I need to, I can just fetch out of whatever level I'm on what the music is. So level 1 has overworld music, and then I've got the bonus level set up too, and so I set the underworld music for the bonus level. And so all I'm doing in this little block here is I'm just checking if there's some music available. Some of my levels might not have music set up, so this will just make sure I only play music for ones that have it. Then I will, again, pause the background music and then play the music. The only other piece of logic I've got here, and I might just mention this, is I don't play the background music when the title screen is loaded, and that's to avoid a small, I don't want to call it a bug, but an error that might arise. In order to stop a bunch of spam and noisy stuff, a lot of browsers, but in particular Chrome, the one that I do my testing in, will not allow you to autoplay any music unless you've actually interacted with the website already, meaning at least clicked on it or pressed your keyboard or something, so that you're not just spamming the user with music. And so to avoid getting that error, because I don't want to play the music on the title screen. So when the title screen comes up, that's what this little extra logic here is saying. As long as I'm not on the title screen, I will play the music. And that's again just to avoid that one initial error. If you're getting an error, and I think in modern browsers it'll say something like the promise has been rejected, I believe, on the play operation you're trying to call. If you get that weird error, it's because, again, the user usually hasn't interacted with the web page already, and that's just to stop some spam. Again, all I do in this piece of logic, though, I pause the old background music and I call play asset on the new one. So pretty straightforward. And most of the time that I'm going to want to play music, I'm going to have some method call that looks a little bit like this. The other ones that I've implemented here are for Mario. So this little instance, for instance, this is only one line I've added here to the little piece of logic. When I squish a Goomba or a Koopa, when I bounce off the Goomba, there was a little stomp noise. I thought, hey, that one's kind of easy to add in, and there you go, I added it in. The other sort of simple noise that was pretty easy to add in, you'll notice again my comment up here says this is where I'm jumping. So I just had to find that little piece of logic in Mario's update where I'm jumping and add in here. So everything above this line is just to do the actual jump. That's the jump. And then here, this is because Mario, I love learning new things every day. So Mario actually has two jump sounds. When Mario is small, his jump sounds one way. When Mario is big, he jumps a different way. And so I had to put, again, I guess we got 5 lines of logic here to put the music in. So the cool thing about this, I guess, is even if you've sort of developed your whole game without any sound, all you're going to need to do to set up the sound is just go turn your asset manager into a jukebox like I have, and then go and sprinkle these little sort of one lines here where you're calling play asset all throughout your code where you need it. All right, to see how easy it is to add in another sound, I'm just going to add in a couple extra sound effects here. And the ones that I've got on my mind are when I jump up and I hit a brick, I'm either going to bump it or break it. And so let's add those sounds in. Now the first thing is At least the site that I found most of my sound effects on had a MP3 for most of them, but it didn't have the bumping sound. And I found the bumping sound on another site, but it was a WAV file. So looks like I'm going to diversify and use some WAV files mixed with MP3s. Let's see how that works. So there I've just updated my AssetManager so that I can use the WAV file. Now I'm going to go to my main and just add the extra two sound effects that I'm going to add. And they're called block and bump, and actually bump was the wave. So let's make sure it's a WAV file. Now to get the sound added, I want to add it to where it belongs. And a lot of the interactions that I do actually happen in Mario, but I did set up this extra special bit for my bricks that if Mario is bouncing into them below, I fire off this bounce flag on them, and then I do the logic for them. For instance, they have to bounce. They actually have to move up a little bit, and I handle that with this velocity of -80 here. And so I'm just going to add into this logic here of my bricks where I bounce. Now the other thing that I'm going to do here, now notice I've got a little type check. That's to see if I'm the right type of brick. Some bricks don't bounce. So in particular, this is checking if it's a question box or if it's a brick or if it's an invisible question box. And so I actually only want the sounds. I think the sounds only happen on the bricks. So I'm going to set up another piece of logic here to test for the brick. So this should test to see if it's a brick, but now I actually have to test to see another thing, which is if Mario is small, the brick will make the bump sound, but if Mario is large, the brick should break, and it should make the breaking sound, which is a different sound. So I need to test to see, is Mario small or large? Okay, so I've set up two blocks here for if he's small, or otherwise if he's large, and then all I have to do to set up the actual call here is call AssetManager.playAsset, and then I just need to remember which one I set up. So for small, it was our bump.wave. For when we're large, it was called brick.mp3. So I think that's all I need to do. Let's go check. Let's test. Okay, so far so good. And well, let's just squish this guy. And then check here. I'm getting a brump. Okay, let's get big and see if it works for the big as well. Now I don't actually break bricks yet, but ooh, and I got an error. And that's because, like any good error in JavaScript, is I spelled this wrong. It's not called brick.mp3, it was called block.mp3. So go double check, make sure everything's spelled right, and it should work. Of course, nothing ever works right the first time, so let's try it the second time. All right, let's try one more time. Second time's the charm, hopefully. Get large and... Now, if only I had broken this brick, the sound would match the action. So I guess I need to still implement that. Anyways, hopefully this will help you put some audio and background music into your own games. So thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.